Welcome to Sleepy Tales. My name is Mateus, and before we begin today's story, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below saying, "I'll sleep well tonight." Now, sit back, relax, and let's dive into tonight's tale. Ethan had always been interested in the human mind and how it worked. That's why he became a psychologist. But one case he took on would change his life forever. It was a dark and stormy Halloween night when Ethan received a call from a frantic woman named Mrs. Johnson. She told him that strange things had been happening in an old abandoned house on the outskirts of town. People had reported seeing lights flickering in the windows and hearing eerie sounds emanating from within. Mrs. Johnson was convinced that the house was haunted and begged Ethan to investigate. Ethan was intrigued. He had heard stories about the house before, but had always dismissed them as mere urban legends. However, he decided to take the case and investigate the house. It was a decision he would soon regret. As he approached the house, he felt an eerie chill run down his spine. The house was old and decrepit, with broken windows and rotting wood. Ethan felt like he was walking into a nightmare. He entered the house and began to explore. At first, everything seemed normal. But then he began to notice strange things. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet, even though he was sure he was the only one in the house. Shadows flickered across the walls, even though there was no source of light. And then he saw her. A young woman appeared before him, her eyes empty and hollow. She looked like she had been dead for years. Ethan tried to run, but the woman blocked his path. She whispered something in his ear, something that made his blood run cold. Then she disappeared. Ethan was terrified. He knew he had to leave the house, but he couldn't find the way out. Every time he tried to leave, he found himself in a different room. And every time he thought he was getting closer to the exit, he found himself back where he started. As the night wore on, Ethan began to experience hallucinations and visions that made him question his own sanity. He saw images of demons and ghosts, and heard voices whispering in his ear. He began to wonder if the house was cursed, or if he was losing his mind. Then, he discovered something even more disturbing. In the basement of the house, he found evidence of a cult that had been performing dark rituals. He saw candles and strange symbols, and heard the faint sound of chanting. He realized that the cult was trying to summon a demon, and that he was in grave danger. Ethan knew he had to escape the house before it was too late. He searched for a way out, but found himself trapped. And then, a voice whispered in his ear, "Follow me." Ethan turned to see the young woman from before, beckoning him to follow her. He had no choice but to obey. She led him through a secret passageway that he had never noticed before, and they emerged outside the house. Ethan thought he had finally escaped, but he was wrong. As he ran through the darkened streets, he realized that the entire town was in on the cult's plan. Every resident was part of the cult, and they were all trying to stop him from leaving. Ethan ran as fast as he could, but he was caught by the cult's leader, a man named Reverend Black. The Reverend told Ethan that he was the key to the cult's success, and that they needed him to complete the ritual. Ethan realized that he was about to be sacrificed to summon the demon. Just as the Reverend was about to strike the killing blow, Ethan woke up. He was in a padded room, surrounded by doctors and nurses. He realized that the entire experience had been a hallucination. He had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and the events in the house had been the result of his own mind playing tricks on him. Ethan was devastated. He had always prided himself on his sanity and his ability to understand the human mind. But now, he was a patient in a mental hospital. He realized that he had been living in his own personal nightmare for months. As he lay in his bed, he wondered if anything he had experienced had been real. Had he really gone to the abandoned house, or had he imagined the entire thing? Had he really seen the young woman, or was she just a product of his imagination? It was then that he noticed a small piece of paper on his bedside table. It read, "You're not crazy. They're real. Don't let them win." Ethan didn't know what to think. Had someone left the note for him, or had he written it himself? He couldn't be sure. But one thing was certain, he couldn't give up. He couldn't let the cult win. He began to investigate the cult from inside the hospital, using any resources he could get his hands on. He spoke to other patients who had experienced similar hallucinations, and even convinced a few of them to join him in his fight against the cult. Months passed, and Ethan's mental state began to improve. He was no longer plagued by hallucinations, and he had even convinced the doctors that he was ready to leave the hospital. On the day of his release, Ethan gathered his fellow patients and made a plan to infiltrate the cult's headquarters. They would pose as new recruits and gain the cult's trust, then sabotage the ritual from within. It was a risky plan, but Ethan was determined to see it through. They arrived at the headquarters and began their infiltration. Everything went according to plan at first, but then something unexpected happened. Ethan saw her again. The young woman from the abandoned house. She appeared before him, just as real as she had been before. Ethan couldn't believe it. Had she been real all along? She led him to a hidden room, where he saw the demon they had been trying to summon. It was the most horrifying thing he had ever seen. But then, the demon spoke to him. "I have been waiting for you, Ethan. You are the key to my release." Ethan realized that the entire cult had been a pawn in the demon's plan. They had been trying to summon it for centuries, and he was the one who would finally bring it forth. Ethan knew he had to act fast. He called out to his fellow patients, and together they destroyed the cult's ritual materials and stopped the demon from being summoned. As they escaped the headquarters, Ethan saw the young woman one final time. She smiled at him and then disappeared. Ethan realized that he had been given a second chance. He had been able to overcome his mental illness and stop the cult from unleashing a demon on the world. He knew that he would never forget the experience, but he also knew that he was stronger because of it. Thank you for listening to this bedtime story, and remember, if you struggle with falling or staying asleep at night, click on the first link in the description for the ultimate solution to your problem. Now, choose one of these two videos and continue on our journey in the world of bedtime stories.